Welcome to the latest edition of Trojan Football Talk. I'm your host, Tom Vartanian. Today's show brought to you by American Credit Union for every day, for everything. Located next to Little Caesars at 3944 Route 281 in Cortland. By the Cortland Voice, the exclusive media partner of TV on the Net. For all your local news and sports in Cortland County at no cost to you, check out cortlandvoice.com. By the Royal Auto Group on Route 281 in Cortland, the home of no hassle, no razzle-dazzle. Check them out at royalautogroup.com. By Yeaman Real Estate at the entrance to Yeaman Park off I-81 exit 11 in Cortland. And our brand new sponsor joining us today for the next few months as well, DJ Philly C. Make all your wedding party or events extra special with the best DJ in the area. Contact DJ Philly C at 607-745-4346. So we welcome them to the podcast world with us for the next few months. And well, going back today, we're not going back as deep as we've been going the last few podcasts. As you know, with Trojan Football Talk, we've been back to the 70s. We've been back to the 90s a couple times. And well, we only go back just under 10 years, not quite 10 years yet now, but still back in time a little bit. But it was a very successful 2 years for the guest I have on today. He was the quarterback for a sectional championship team. And of course, he's been around Homer football much longer than his playing days. We'll get into that as we go along. But walking with us today, some people know him as Andrew, but we all call him Drew. Drew Cottrell, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on. I think this has been awesome so far. I've tried to check out as many of the Trojan football talks as I could up to now. So just excited to be on the show. Thank you.
And of course, you're I guess you call him your boss in the lacrosse world, is our number 5 download on TV on the net. All still Jake Plunkett, of course. But that's what I said. We will be doing a TV on the net with you later, and we will get into your overall career. But like we said, today we're concentrating on football. And obviously, your dad played football. Your dad has been a coach for seems like forever now too, like Coach Batsy, like they've been around forever. But what was it that got your love of football going, really?
Yeah, I think it's something special in the Homer community. Just how important Homer Trojans football really is. So I think I remember from a young age, being excited to go to the football games on Friday nights. And I think it was about the time that I was in third grade, or maybe it was even earlier than that, maybe first grade. But I know I'd gotten to an age and I'd wanted to be on the sideline. And Coach P, let me be the water boy. And I think that was just kind of being around the team all the time, going to games. It was just kind of every Friday felt special. So I think that was kind of where that love of Homer Trojan football really started.
And of course, it's I think it's kind of bred where you've come. Like you said, you're now a coach. Of course, you're coaching lacrosse. And I said, I've always joked there'd be one day we'd have a new breed. We'd have a new Coach Batsilic, a new Coach Cottrell, and then maybe if we could ever talk Chris Whitten out of his success in Massachusetts to come back, we could have the same 3 varsity coaches at Homer that we have now. The new generation.
Yeah, I mean that would be awesome. I think Coach Whitten might be the harder pull there with all the success that he's had. But hey, you never know. I don't know what's going to happen these next few years. I might find myself back in Homer.
So, as we said, on the sidelines, like I said, yeah, you weren't just like coming to games. You got to be on the sidelines all the time. And, of course, a lot of fun conversations over those years. For a while, you and your brother were both water boys. And, of course, as your dad said, for some reason, your younger brother, Nate, decided he'd rather play soccer than football. So he went the soccer route. And, of course, as we know, then he just made a nice path that way. But the one thing I know we joked about it when we talked about setting up these podcasts, I said, the one thing I thought was funny, you seemed like you had a coaching gene in you very early because Coach Pancilik would always talk about how sometimes your dad would come to the coaches meetings, usually on Sunday nights and stuff, where they go over game films and all that stuff, start planning for the new week. And there'd be a playbook with a bunch of plays that young Drew Cottrell drew up and said, I think these would work too.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, it was an old orange notebook, and I would just spend time, probably on the weekends after watching the games and just just draw up different plays, so different passing plays with different routes. I think there was at one point, it was either Marcellus or Chitnango had a really dynamic offense. And, so there was me sitting trying to figure out a defensive formation. And it was probably ridiculous and wouldn't have worked to stop, that offense. And Coach P was always, he's great. So he would occasionally sit down with me and just kind of look over the plays real quick and talk about them and say, oh, this one might work and whatnot. So it was kind of cool, to be able to be part of the program in that way. And, for Coach P to be able to kind of, have me at 10 years old showing up with a notebook with plays that I had drawn up and at least give me the courtesy of sitting down with me and just kind of looking through them.
Marcellus was one of those teams back in the day there that I think Joe Fiacco was the coach when you were there. I think Joe was coaching them, and always look for some kind of a gimmick play or something against you guys whenever you guys met. That just you knew what was coming at some point. All these plays you drew up over the years for Coach P and your dad and stuff. Did any of them ever sneak into a game?
I think the story goes they used one of them. Now, I don't know if they actually used it or if they were just trying to make, the fourth grade Drew feel good. But if I remember the story correctly, there was towards the end of the season, maybe they were playing Oneida, that they claimed they used one of the plays out of the notebook. So I guess we'll have to see Coach P if he remembers that or if that's a true story or not. But so it might have made the field, but I think a large chunk of them did not.
And of course, along with drawing up the playbook, the one thing you kind of forgot, how you remember this. And I just remember you and I talked about this. It was funny because that's the other thing we used to always hear during those young days. You were big into, the EA Sports games. And of course, Madden was one, of course, the college football side of things. And well, there was always a Homer Trojans team kind of playing during your years. The roster kind of morphed to whatever one of the teams you decided, if you created your own team or decided to go with you just changed one of the teams that was there already, but all of a sudden you were drawing up Homer teams and taking them to the video world.
Yeah, I think that was always, especially when I was younger with like you said, the Madden and the college football games. I was always excited when I got, the packet at the start of the year that had the rosters, because I'd go in and completely change all the players that were listed in there and make them into the Homer football players with their accurate, height and weight, which in the NFL is definitely a disadvantage for the team. But, when you're able to go in there and make them 99 overall at every attribute, they still did all right against the NFL and the college teams.
What made you want to do that? I think it's just funny and it's great. I just got whatever made you decide you want to do that.
I don't really know, to be honest. I think it was one of those things where I loved Homer football so much. And, I think at the same time, Syracuse football wasn't great. And that was kind of my team for the college football game, obviously. So when you're rolling out there and it was, probably around the Greg Robinson era that wasn't going so hot, to be able to go in there and just make a Homer football team that I could play with and beat, the Ohio States and the USCs and the Alabamas, I think that was kind of cool. So I think that was probably what made me do that.
So your playing days, you started right with the youth football program and got your feet wet right there. And what was it that ended up having you gravitate towards being a quarterback?
Yeah, so I started when I was younger. I played flag football up until junior high, and that's kind of when I started the contact football route. I think the biggest thing with being a quarterback, I'd actually go back to 2003, which was my first year on the sideline. The quarterback at the time was Will Rumsey, and he was just great with me. I'm sure, to have the offensive coordinator's son running around at practices and stuff was probably, I'm sure at the time was nice, but it was a little annoying at times to have this guy just running all over the place following you. But he was just such a great person. He'd come and talk to me while the defense was on the field during games. And, I'd probably ask him questions and he would sit there and answer them as the game's going on. And that was kind of the first real Homer football player I remember having a great connection with. So from that, I think it was, he was the quarterback of that team. And then just playing out, in the yard with my buddies growing up. I liked to throw the football. So I think that was kind of the main thing that, growing up and playing flag, I was the quarterback on a lot of those teams. So I think that just kind of continued into junior high and then, obviously all the way through.
So, who were your junior high coaches when you got into the school system more? You got to the high school. Who were your coaches, and how were those couple seasons?
Yeah, I think Coach Ferrito was the head coach, and I remember I think Dustin Morris was there for a year, and then Sean McGrath's dad helped out as well. And I think so. It was definitely adjustment for me, obviously. Coming from flag football where there's no contact, coming to contact football. I don't think I got right into the hitting right away. It was a little bit different. And then obviously flag football is kind of tighter spaces. There's not linemen in front of you. So it was a little bit easier to throw the ball where you get to the first time you're playing junior high football at Homer, so you're running the ball a lot. And I was getting used to the proper, footwork to hand the ball out. But at the time, we had, Alec Bush, obviously, Gage Root was super fast. Jaden was always athletic. So when you have those guys to hand the ball off to, I think our junior high team was also pretty successful at that age. So it was a lot of kind of getting used to the system that Homer football was. And it was kind of the first time where I had that Homer football jersey on. So it was kind of a special experience in that regard.
And of course, after 2 years of modifieds, you moved on to the high school, 2 years with the JVs, and of course, Homer JV football has been as good as your years were on the varsity. The JVs have been just as strong. So, what was your 2 years like on the JV side of things?
It was great. I mean, again, just a great experience. And like you said, our teams were successful. So I love the coaching staff. Obviously, Coach Schneider, was kind of in charge of running the offense. You had Coach DeMatti that was really big with the linemen, and then Coach Sorensen was our defensive coordinator. So, my ninth grade year, I think I was splitting time at quarterback. Again, just kind of getting used to the contact football system, and the proper footwork. Now we're expanding the playbook a little bit. We can throw the ball a little bit farther. And then, defensively, I think I got on the field as a linebacker as a 10th grader. I don't think I made a whole bunch of tackles. I think that was probably a nice move of Coach Sorensen to include me on the defensive side, probably more as a quarterback of the defense where I was helping call the plays in from the sideline, but it wasn't really my strong suit, that's for sure. But it was great. We played great competition. And I think at the end of both years, we ended up playing a championship game almost against Cazenovia, which was always such a cool way to end the season, when maybe we'd be undefeated or, we'd do well in the regular season, let's say. And then at the end of the year, you'd get to add in a Cazenovia that was undefeated on that other half of the B. 10th grade was a special year because we got to play a private school out of Rochester, the Aquinas Institute. Yeah. And that team ended up having, I think 2 or 3 guys that have made it to the NFL, so it was a special group. We lost that game, but it was such a cool thing to experience a team that kind of brought the level up that we were used to and that we practiced at. Sometimes some of the high schools we'd play, their JV teams would be decimated because their varsity teams would take so many of their sophomores and freshmen that could play, where we kind of kept our team a little bit more solid, which is something that Coach P likes to do. So to play a team like that was big for us and kind of gave us that level that we wanted to get to. So it was kind of a motivator in that, in that sense of it.
By then, you come to your junior year, you're on the varsity, and actually it's funny, when I still look at the roster, you are listed as the only quarterback on the roster, though we kind of know somebody else did throw a couple passes, didn't complete one, but I would say as well as, yes, you had a great runner both years, all these years with Alec Bush, but maybe pound for pound the best overall player because he could run kickoffs back, he could catch passes, he could run the ball if you wanted. And I do have a question I will ask you about him and Alec later, but he had Gene Gavidia. Probably was one of your backup quarterback, possibly at that time, just because of his talent. But like we say, that freshman year, or your junior year, 6-0 record in the B West. So it was one of these runs where the team just went crazy through there, and 8-1 all along. It ended in the sectional semifinals. Of course, earlier days it was VVS. This time, your time around, it was the Oneida was one of those teams that was always kind of waiting at the end of the rainbow for to get by them. And of course, if you could get by them, Cass, and of course Camden is in there as well. So, but like I say, 8-1 season overall, 6-0 in the league. Started out. You're a freshman. You're a junior quarterback. Your first year on varsity, and your first game is against Phoenix in the Carrier Dome. What was it like? Getting that first taste of the Dome, not being a sectional game.
Well, it was obviously an awesome experience to play in the Carrier Dome. I think that's something that when you grow up in Central New York, you think about, and that's kind of a big place, to play is the Carrier Dome where Syracuse plays, and there's that kind of special aspect to it. I remember a lot about that first game. Obviously, the nerves, because now not only am I sitting there thinking I'm starting at quarterback for Homer. I've been around the program for so long. I obviously want to do well, but now you're getting dressed in the Carrier Dome locker room. You walk out in the stadium and it's massive. It's bigger than anything you've been in front of before. But it was a great experience. The funny story kind of with that is a lot of my family from New Jersey had made the trip up in order to see that game. And obviously Homer football travels well. So we had a good sized crowd that day. And I think I rolled out there in the first possession. Maybe we had, one or two plays. And I think either Alec or Chris Brown ran, probably 65 yards for a touchdown right off the bat. It's a great start to the game. Second possession, same kind of thing. I think, it was either Alec or Chris, whichever one didn't run the first one, ran the second one. Again, a long run for a touchdown. And I think the next possession, maybe we ran, like a reverse or an end around for Jaden, and that was a touchdown as well. So very quickly, it was close to 21-0. And at that point, I think it was like, well, we can't really throw on this Phoenix team. They're obviously not to the level that we were. So I actually went my first varsity high school game with all my family in the stands without throwing a pass in the Carrier Dome. So I know that's one thing that we like to pick on as a family, for my dad a lot of the time is like, come on, you couldn't let me throw one pass in the Carrier Dome for my first game. But again, just an awesome experience for sure.
And in all fairness, we'll say the offensive coordinator wouldn't have minded throwing a few more passes at any time. But of course, with the Homer known for the ground game, that kind of is more the vogue run and use the pass to set up to kind of use a few passes here and there to set up the run or keep the defense loose a little bit. But I think your dad would like to at least have you maybe throw a touchdown pass in the Dome that first game.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have, and I think it was one of those things where had we needed it, we definitely would have thrown the ball. But very quickly, it was kind of, we had a lot of talent on that team when I was a junior for sure, and I don't think that Phoenix program was quite up to that level. So a great experience for both schools, but I don't think we really needed to throw the ball that day, and it was more of a let's just practice our ground game. Let's not put any pass plays on film, and then we'll move on to next week.
And of course, that first game, 52-6. So obviously, yeah, running the ball was the norm for that game. Your next two games of the season were you started a 3-game homestand, and actually your two closest games in the 8-0 start for the season came home and had non-leaguer against Skinny Atlas, won that by 10, 23-13. And then the following week opened up the league schedule with Chittenango and won 28-14. And those, hard to believe, were your closest two games of the year.
Yeah, I think Skinny Atlas and Chittenango were both, great football programs at that time. And still, again, another kind of comical story for me throwing the ball is I don't think I completed a pass against Skinny Atlas Maybe we threw the ball a few times and didn't connect on anything. And then against Chittenango, we decided to run a screen, probably to say, hey, let's get Drew a completion here finally, and maybe we'll get things rolling a little bit. And we had a little bit of miscommunication on where it was going, and we ended up having a lineman, and I think maybe Chris Brown was the target coming out as the fullback. They ran into each other, and there was a Chittenango maybe cornerback sitting behind that, and he caught it and he just took it. And so my first completed pass at the varsity level was to the wrong team for a touchdown. So thankfully things got a little bit better for me in that regard going forward after that. But that was kind of another thing that, my dad and I joke about all the time, is my first completion was to the wrong team, but it was for a touchdown.
So you did actually, stat-wise, you had 7 touchdown passes on the year, but actually you had 8. But ironically, that interception was the only one you threw all year. You did complete over 50% of your passes, 26 or 49 for the season, and that was your lone interception.
Yeah, I think that was always a thing that I wanted to make a focus, is obviously our ground game was so good. We could run the ball, over everybody pretty much. So when we did decide to throw the ball, it was kind of important for me to make sure I wasn't giving it to the other team, because I knew we'd have success again if we started running the ball again. So just limiting turnovers, limiting mistakes was kind of was at the forefront of my mind whenever a pass play was called.
Of course, after those 2 wins, it was Westhill, the third of the home games, and that was a 41-7 victory over Westhill, who of course has always been one of Homer's rivals. That was back on the road up against Solvay, a game where really the team shut them out, but it was 42-2. They did get a safety. Solvay did get 1 safety for 2 points in that ball game, but the winning continued, and then it was a close game. It was Marcellus. It was at Marcellus, but I think it's still the highest scoring game in Homer history as far as 2 teams combining for points. But just that unbelievably crazy game, 58-45 win over at Marcellus.
That was one of the games that I think I'll remember for a long time. I remember it was a close game. Both teams were great that year. And the image and the memory I have in my head is us at halftime. Maybe we were up, I don't remember for sure, but we're running off the field, and maybe it was a homecoming or senior day for Marcellus. So the place was packed. And as we're running off the field back to the school, there was almost a tunnel made of Marcellus high schoolers, and they were just booing us, yelling at us, which was kind of a cool experience. It was like a big time, big school football kind of experience for us, where the other team's fans are just letting us have it as we're running off the field here. And I think, it was a close game. And then coming out of halftime, I think they ended up making the decision to kick the ball deep. And I believe Jaden took it back all the way for a touchdown. And from there, we kind of had the upper hand in that game. So just a really cool experience, like I said, to kind of battle it out with another program that was at the top of the division there. So again, another game that I'll remember for a long time.
And following that, it's you close out the season with a pair of home games. The first one, of course, your first home court jug game, a 34-6 victory over Cortland. And what were your thoughts of your first encounter as really as a player in the home court jug?
Yeah, obviously, growing up in Homer, New York, that's the biggest game for football, is the home court game. You grow up right down the road from the guys playing from Cortland, and you battle in every sport, youth sports growing up, whether it's, basketball, lacrosse, football, they're right there. It's an easy travel. So you're always matched up against each other. And I think it was kind of, again, you kind of felt the nerves going into the game, even though they weren't having quite the season that we were. When you're battling in a rivalry like that, anybody, can be better on that day. So a little bit of nerves going into it. We knew we had to play well, and luckily we did, to kind of secure that first jug. And it was a great feeling at the end of that.
So that wrapped up the good old 6-0 B West season. 7th win of the year. Win number 8 came the next week, the first round of the Section 3 Class B tournament. Took on Camden at home. Again, that was a convincing win, 41-14.
Yeah, and I think Camden was on a stretch there where they had a few talented teams right in a row where Homer seemed to match up. I think maybe my freshman year, Homer ended up going up to Camden and lost in the playoffs. So again, it was kind of that first taste of playing somebody on the other side of the Bees. And, they always had the Casanovias, the VVSs, the Oneidas. So you knew it was going to be a challenge. And I think we came in prepared and, we had a good game plan and ended up pulling that one out.
And then the next week was the end of the season. It was the sectional semifinals. It was a neutral site. It was back to Chittenango you went, but of course, this was the year Oneida had your guys' record 31-9 to close out that season.
Yeah, that was a tough one for sure. I think it was the first time we really struggled to run the ball. Oneida had some really big linemen and some great linebackers that were making a lot of plays, and I think we struggled a little bit, and I think we tried to go through the air, and they just had a really solid defense, and they were making some plays on offense, and it just seemed the game kept getting a little bit farther out of hand for us. We made some plays here and there, but I think that year Oneida was just a better team than we were. But obviously that gave us the motivation, going into my senior year was, we had a successful year and you only have the one loss and that's great. But, you obviously want to go a little bit farther than that. So that was kind of the motivating factor going into that next year.
And as we said, the weapons that you had, like say, you were 26 for 49, 572 yards, 7 touchdowns. 5 of them, of course, going to Jaden Gavitti. He only caught 10 passes, but 5 of them were touchdowns, and he had 332 yards, average 33 yards a catch. Then obviously, like you say, the swing passes to Chris Brown that out of the backfield. He was number 2 with 9 catches for 112 yards, and then you had bunch of good seniors. You had some good seniors. You had like Jake Casey, a couple of catches, Connor Simonetta, a couple of catches. Then of course in that mix as well, Millet DeAngelis with a catch, and of course a junior, one of your all your juniors, JK's in that mix. But of course, then you go to the offensive side. Again, it was junior led. Alec Bush, of course, that season 1,333 yards, 15 touchdowns. Gage Root, not the biggest guy on the defensive side of the ball either, but second leading ball carrier, 328 yards, and then Chris Brown with 281s. Jake Casey, Jaden, a couple catch, few runs in there also, two touchdown runs, 115 yards. And it's so, as much as you said, you have all these weapons to work with. It was you had the line to do things. You had a line that could do things. And I went back and I said, I didn't realize it was not that senior laden. You had Brent Bishop was a senior on the team, Sean McGrath, and of course, the special part of that offensive line, as far as the seniors go, he get to play. I think he did play the Cortland game, the whole last home game, or either the Cortland game or it was Camden, but that was the return of Jack Connery from his injury, and he got to, play one of his last senior year games at home. So you had those are the only seniors on that line. But then you go back and look at the other linemen you had a bunch of juniors: Tim Russell, Matt Suits, of course, Anthony Basile. In that mix, and a couple of sophomores, Lucas Miller, and Zach Clark. So, I mean, it was a good and yet young offensive line that, really helped set up a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's always been the strength. And I think even Alex said on his version of this podcast, our offensive line at Homer is kind of, obviously the unsung heroes where they're working every day to perfect their footwork, their teamwork together on how they're blocking. And that kind of opens everything up for us as an offense. So whether we're opening a hole for, those guys to run through, or just giving me a little bit of time after a ball fake to throw it over the top to Jaden, those guys are the key to any success of an offense. So like you said, this year's seniors, between Brent Bishop and Sean McGrath, it was obviously great to have Jack Connery back because he's such a team guy. I think Nick Holcomb played a little bit of line for us as well. Those guys were kind of big to getting some of those young guys that were playing varsity for the first time on that line, just kind of up to speed on the varsity football game.
Yeah, I passed over Nick on the senior side. And I forgot the third sophomore on that offensive line, a young guy who went on to have a pretty decent career, Dylan Hotchkiss.
Yeah, and I think all those guys played a role for us. So, whether they were starting for us at one of those positions or they were rotating through, I think we had some injuries that year on the line as well. So a lot of those guys were getting opportunities, which, kind of like you said, we were young then. So it kind of built us all the better for that next season, obviously.
And of course, you can't forget the tight ends when you talk about that line. Of course, Milton DeAngelis was the senior, and he was a 1 year player. I think he transferred into Homer this year because he wasn't back as a senior. But you had Rob Hornberger for that junior season, was at a good size, 6'4" 185, was a tight end.
Yeah, Millet did a great job for us, in both blocking and just being a target down the field. Obviously I don't think he was used a ton in the passing game just because he was such a great blocker. And then Rob was just such a big target. And I think he was still kind of getting used to, obviously it's tough to just be in the district for a year really, and kind of get up to speed with the playbook and everything along those lines. But to have a 6'4" target out there is obviously, as a quarterback, it's nice to know my tight end's very tall and I'm going to be able to see him pretty easily as I drop back here.
And of course, it was the beginning of successful run for a Homer kicker as well. He was only a sophomore, but he had to learn to play kind of opposition. So he learned a little defensive back, a little bit of wide receiver, but it was also your sophomore, and he was the kicker, Joel Christopher, that year.
Yeah, Joel's a family friend, and we grew up kind of with the Christophers, and I knew he was obviously a great soccer player, just like his older brother Drew, but I think he kind of wanted to explore the football route, and he enjoyed hanging out with some of us that were on the football team. So it was kind of natural for a soccer guy to try out as a kicker. And I think I remember my dad and I just meeting Joel's dad and him at the turf one day and just kicking the ball around a little bit. And, I think he decided to make the switch, and it was great. I really enjoyed being the holder on PATs for him. I always felt that was a big role of the team is, as Joel's kind of getting out there as a sophomore, he's playing a new sport, and at the varsity level, just making sure like we're on the same page, and he's ready to go for this kick, and we're all composed and ready to go. That's huge because I think, especially at our size of a school, a kicker is such a pivotal part of a team where it can make a difference. A lot of schools just don't have a kicker that can go in there and hit a field goal for 3 points when you need it. It's kind of, we're at the 30-yard line. It's 4th and, 3. We have to go for it, where Joel was able to kind of give us that extra option offensively to say, well, you know what, they stopped us here on 3 downs. It's 4th down, but we know Joel can hit this kick. So we'll get the 3 points, and then we'll go back and stop him on defense.
And that leads us to the senior season, and it was a record-setting season in so many ways. 57 rushing touchdowns. You passed for 13 more, 14 altogether. JK's had a touchdown pass in there as well. You threw for 823 yards, 44 for 79, 3 interceptions, but again, 13 touchdown passes. And some guy on that receiving end of them was Jaden Gavidia. He only had 20 receptions and 12 touchdowns. So it's like, yeah, 500 yards just alone, him receiving average, again, 25 yards. This year it was Dean Riley came back to football, and yeah, Dean Riley caught 11 passes, 162 yards. So the defense, that part of the team was there, but of course it was Alec Bush becoming the all-time leading rusher in school history with 2,418 yards in that game, or for the season, and 32 touchdowns overall. Chris Birchenoff really stepped up much more as a senior. He got 362 yards. Gage Root again, even kind of playing with some sore knees off and on, ran for 350 yards and moved. JK is one of your senior classmates. The emergence of one of those juniors, Beck Lundeen, that year. But then you look at the other runner, Drew Becker, of course, Jaden. Yourself picked up a few yards, 135 yards yourself that year, and a touchdown on the ground. But then it was also, you were starting to see the next group. Ryan Wainwright was a junior, Christian Pitsley, Dylan Williams Bachman, and also Garrett Lewis. So it was, a good mix there again of talent. And there wasn't a close game really until you got to the sectional semifinals. I mean, the league season started out 72-6 over Phoenix, then a 55-6 win over Cortland in the court jug, the home court jug game. Back home against Solvay, 65-14 win, 52-0 over Chittenango, 69-2 over Skinny Atlas, 61-30 over Marcellus, and then the rest of the B West, 47-13 win over at West Hill. So it was a season where you guys were untouchable in the division.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of that is kind of what you mentioned right there with the depth that we had. I think we were just deeper than a lot of teams with great athletes. So, there were a lot of those schools had, some great starters and some great players, but I don't think any of those teams really had the depth of talent that we had across the board of all the starters, and then also kind of those guys that were just kind of waiting, their turn to kind of get a shot at it. So I think we had Alec, obviously, who was a special talent. And then, if Alec needed a blow, well, we had Gage Root, who was super fast, and we had Chris Birchenough, who was a really strong, tough runner. So to have three tailbacks that probably would have started for a majority of those teams, it's fortunate, for our offense to have. And it was tough for a lot of those teams to stop us. So, I think we had some blowouts there, and I think it was good because a lot of times our backups were able to get in the game a little bit earlier and get a lot of experience. And I think that's good for a program to have guys kind of be ready to go. And, we're practicing every day against our toughest competition that we were going to see all week. So I think that kind of pushed us forward. And, it was obviously a fun experience to put a lot of points on the board and hold the other teams to, we tried to get a shutout every week there. So just a really special team, in that regard, kind of going through that B West.
And that was the year, Jake Hayes snuck a pass and never really said like a touchdown pass, but he was a wide receiver more. So it had to be one of those gimmick plays that everybody likes every so often. But Garrett Lewis was your backup. He did get him through a couple passes, completed one of his two passes. But so here you, like you said, you were the guy there, but also working to groom Garrett to be one of those guys to step in next as a quarterback.
Yeah, it was great because like you said, the year before I was the only quarterback really listed on the roster. So Jake was ready as an emergency quarterback if we needed. Jaden was there just being the talent that he is, in case we needed it. But we didn't really have another quarterback my junior year. Where senior year we had Garrett, who had just come off a successful JV year. I think they might have gone undefeated the year before in JVs. So, it was just a great opportunity kind of for me to start being a leader in that regard and kind of telling them, hey, this is the different speed we're playing at now. Here's the things to really look at that you didn't have to worry about at the JV level, but now as a varsity player, you do. So I think that was, special. And you mentioned Jake's play. I think that was in the Carrier Dome against Cazenovia. We ended up throwing, I took the snap, threw it backwards to Jake, and he hit Dean Riley for a touchdown in the end zone. So it was a big play there, a big momentum play in the Carrier Dome.
So throughout that season, we said just, not really that many, any close games. But again, like you say, you get to close out your home court career with 2 wins over Cortland and both fairly convincingly. And but like you say, you get that's a big game, and it's always a big game. But it seemed like the olden days, it seemed like it was much more intense. It's like when you get to this point, it was. And I think it does live in the older people's minds more, the real intensity of the rivalry, the way it was. Because you guys, these days were actually, you were playing lacrosse together. You guys did a lot of things together, but it was still, you want to beat them because it's bragging rights for another year, especially on the football side or on the lacrosse side. But it's intense, but is it as intense as maybe it was back in the day, like when your dad played and some other people, other than the fact you mingle more, so much more?
Right. I think it's probably not as intense. Like you said, there is that connection and overlap in a lot of sports. But in that same regard, now everybody's connected. So everybody, with social media and, group chats and whatnot, the bragging rights were so big in those games because those people could remind you over and over again about how the score went in those games. So for us, I think we knew going into that, especially that senior year game, we knew we were the better team. And we just had a real focus on game planning well, focusing, during practice all week to be able to make sure that score reflected how much better of a football team we were that year than Cortland's team. And that was the motivation, was we don't want to just win this game. We want to make sure the score, reflects kind of the talent level that we have. So from, again, maybe not the intensity in that rivalry that there was, but with bragging rights and the connection through social media, we wanted to make our point clear about the talent that we had on our roster.
And again, like you said, Alec mentioned it, and of course we talked about. It's still funny. It's still only 3 seniors on the offensive line. Of course, Matt Suits was back. Brandon Slant was a senior on the team this year. And of course, Anthony Basile. You and Basile seem like 2 inseparable guys, no matter what. And Anthony was a very special guy, special lineman.
Yes, Anthony was super talented, and he had actually gotten pulled up along with I believe Jaden and maybe Jake Hayes as sophomores. So Anthony had a ton of experience as an offensive lineman in that program, and obviously he was awarded with the Zarnecki Award, so he was able to wear 68, and that was special. But he was kind of, in a way, the quarterback of that line. We'd be going through practice, and any time that there was a little mishap, with the footwork or who was blocking who, Anthony was able to tell everybody on that line of scrimmage, hey, I went here, you got to go here, or just working out like, hey, they didn't set up the same way that we thought they would. This is what we can do to be successful. And so, to have someone like that is just special for an offense, because like you said, we still had a relatively young line that year, with Dylan Hotchkiss. I believe we had Zach Clark starting at tackle. I think maybe Luke Miller was starting for a while there as well. So we had some young guys that were just kind of getting ready to kind of take that next step. And again, maybe we weren't challenged a ton at the start of that year, but Anthony was making sure every day that we were working hard, we were focusing, making sure that we were ready to go, so that when we did face an opponent as talented as us, we'd have that kind of those reps that we needed to be successful.
And of course, you mentioned Dylan was back. The other juniors knew that year was Andrew McMasters was up. Of course, Matt Suits, we talked about being a senior. Well, his younger brother Mark joined the team. Jason Marshall, Bryson Howell, Ryan Parker was up here. Matt Fox was a junior as well. Matt Brown, Luke Miller, Tim Swenson, Zach Clark did come up. Drew Stafford. And you had a pretty good sophomore that had a pretty good 3-year run. Luke Sears made his debut on the varsity as a sophomore. So, it was a very, very talented and very deep, really a very deep offensive and defensive line you had now.
Yeah, that goes back to just the depth of talent. Yeah, Luke Sears was the guy that was actually attached at the hip to Anthony. I think the coaching staff realized, how much of a coach on the field Anthony was able to be, to take that sophomore Luke Sears, who had an awesome, he was already a big guy and he could move his feet pretty well, just to say, now Anthony was able to kind of tell him and talk through each play, and it kind of brought him up to speed a lot faster than he would have probably without Anthony's help. So, that offensive line was great. And then even if, we went to like a second deep, if you went to those backups, that still would have been a successful offensive line, at the high school level. So I think that was another plus for our team. And again, those guys didn't get their name in the paper all the time. But like Alec would say the same thing, that was the key point of our offense and our team, really. So just to have that offensive lineman group was huge for our team.
And of course, at that point, you said not only, of course, your dad was one of the assistant coaches. Of course, Jim Whidden, it's been there forever and ever. Yeah, the line was his baby. He loved his linemen, but of course, then you also had a younger guy back, on the staff. That's when David Fitzelic started, helping coach out as well.
Yeah, young Coach P, was on the sideline, which was cool because I remember when he was a player, getting to watch him play as a center for the football team. So to have him back was great. Just kind of a younger guy compared to Coach P and my dad and Coach Whidden. Just to have a younger guy that was kind of he'd be able to pull guys aside and kind of talk to one or two a little bit about what went wrong on that last play or what else we can do offensively. Just kind of another person to kind of bounce ideas off of was great to have on our sideline, and was just another plus in already a great coaching staff.
And of course, then sectionals started, and not a bad run there. It started out easily enough, 34-0 over South Jefferson, a home game. And of course, then it was a neutral site, but guys being one of the highest seeds, of course. Semifinals back in Chittenango, but again, the rematch with Oneida, and this time it was you guys with that 38-21 victory.
So the South Jeff game in the first round was kind of our first taste of competitive football, really, that whole year. The West Hill game was obviously a close game, and that was a battle, but I think the second half really, we took off. It was the same kind of thing in the South Jeff game where I think we went into the halftime and it was maybe 13-0, and we didn't feel like we were playing very well. And I remember sitting in the locker room at halftime, and we all just kind of sat down, talked through some changes we could make, both offensively and defensively, specifically offensively, because our defense was doing a good job with the game plan there and executing that. And just remember, between Alec and, myself and Anthony Basile, just kind of talking to everyone, making sure we were still composed. Let's just play out our game plan, continue to do the things that we need to do. And I think we wore down that South Jeff team that was talented. They had some really tough kids, but I think they got to the game with maybe just over 20 guys. So, our depth kind of shined through in that second half.
And then, like we say, the revenge against Oneida in the semifinals back at Chittenango.
Just a huge game on the schedule, obviously one that as soon as we realized we were going to be matched up with was a big one, because that was the big motivation going into the year, was remembering the Oneida game the year before. Oneida is just such a great program that we knew we had to be focused as always and game plan well and listen to our coaches who, spent all that time watching film and getting us prepared. So I think that time, we were kind of at the level where we weren't going to be stopped, that year by Oneida, and we had that motivation to kind of make it into the Carrier Dome and go up against a great Cazenovia team.
And ironically, it was Caz in the finals, and you won your first game in the Carrier Dome, and your last game in the Carrier Dome as a senior was that sectional final against Cazenovia. And again, a good battle, but it's one of those where you guys took over it. But a 38-24 win for that sectional title that the team hadn't had since 2005.
The biggest thing in that game was how great our defense played. That Cazenovia team had some unbelievable athletes. I think they probably had a handful of guys that played Division I, of something, whether it was lacrosse or football. And if I'm remembering correctly, we ended up finishing with 7 turnovers that we caused the Cazenovia offense to have. They had kind of a spread offense where they like to do some option and air the ball out. And, I think we had a handful of interceptions. We forced some fumbles. And that was the biggest thing in that game is, they had a great defense as well. And, we had to battle to make plays in that game, but our defense really stopped their offense. And, obviously possession, is key in a football game. So to be able to take the ball back from Cazenovia and keep giving our offense chances to kind of break through their defense was what really kind of carried us through that win, which was so special.
And of course, the bugaboo is Section 4, state regionals. In the early 2000s, Shenango Forks was the powerhouse, and they were the one that ended Homer's run. You went up against a team that was going through their phase of domination, and that was Maine Endwell. And the final score says 27-10, but yeah, really at halftime, it was still a tight game on a very cold night up at CNS.
Yeah, there's obviously a few things that you always remember from your last high school football game. One was the freezing cold. I feel like that was, walking out on the stadium, out at CNS there. That was as cold as I remember being, out there in warmups. And then obviously, the adrenaline starts pumping and you're getting ready for the game and you don't really feel the temperature anymore. But Maine Endwell was, again, just such a talented team. I think they had a few, just like Casanova, they had a bunch of D1 athletes. They had some big linemen that we probably hadn't seen, that level of size and speed and agility, up to that point. I think we battled there, and at the end of the day, they kind of just beat us down a little bit with their run game. They ended up using their fullback, who was a big kid. And they had a great quarterback. They had I think maybe they ran some kind of Delaware motion or something where they had a couple of athletes in the backfield that they kept giving the ball to as well, where we were maybe a little undersized against a team like that. And, eventually they wore us down and beat us. But, I think we were maybe one of the only teams to really stick with them through that run of, 60, whatever wins it felt like they had in a row, to the point where they had, I think like an E60 short was done on their program, before they ended up losing, I think maybe a year or two later in the state playoffs. So it was great to compete against a team that we felt like we were equally as talented to, and I think we would have loved to have that one back and have a few different opportunities and, maybe, get another shot at them. But I thought that, the sectional championship was kind of the thing that we were really looking forward to at the start of that year. And we accomplished that. And, a better team was on the field against us that day and they ended up pulling it out. So as much as we'd like to say, we would have loved to have another shot at them, I don't know that it would have gone a ton differently. We'd like to think it would, but that was a very talented Maine Endwell team.
And that was the coming out party for their little sophomore. Wolfbrook was that sophomore running back against you guys. And of course, he went on to play at Army and had a nice career playing for Army as well. So, I mean, so it's ironic. The ironic thing about that, though, too, is, as far as, games for you, that was your best game passing in your career, 10 for 18 that day for 141 yards on a miserable day.
Miserable is definitely a good word for that. I had injured my elbow a little bit at the end of the first half of the Casanova game in the Dome. We kind of had a last second kind of throw and they sent 6 guys or 7 guys and we had 6 blocking and one guy came off the end and it kind of pulled my elbow back and hyperextended it. So that whole next week of practice, I was in, some intense pain throwing the ball. So I was obviously nervous going into that game. And right from the get-go, we could tell we were going to have a little bit of trouble running up against this team. They had obviously game planned and they said, we're going to stop Alec Bush, at all costs. So at one point, I think I dropped back and I was able to kind of float the ball over the defense. I think maybe their best player or one of their best athletes, last name was Palmer. He might even have been the quarterback too, but he went up and I think he dove, ended up missing it, and Jaden caught it and took it to the end zone. So, I think that kind of got us started. We were up 7-0 there. And then, obviously when we get to the end of the game, we kind of ran a 2-minute offense and, I was calling different plays from the line of scrimmage based on where they were lining up. So I ended up with a good amount of yards in that game, unfortunately ended with the 3 interceptions. So aside from that first one that we talked about at Chittenango or, home against Chittenango, I hadn't turned the ball over at all. And then, in that game, we had 3 interceptions. So, I'd like to have a couple of those back. I think, one, the kid caught one-handed in the back of the end zone. It's just a great player making a great play. But, from a yardage standpoint, it was obviously one of my better ones. And it was fun to compete against a team with that great of a defense and be able to go up to the line of scrimmage and kind of make adjustments for our offense and find the holes in their defense and drive down the field a little bit.
So if you said capped off, an overall year, 823 yards, 7th best single season passing in school history, that 823, only 2 notches behind the guy you grew up watching, Will Rumsey, of course, Joe Sheridan, in between the two of you there. But also you finished up 2, 4, 6, 7th career passing yards with 1,395 yards. And who's the guy ahead of him? Again, Will Rumsey. You're the guy you grew up idolizing. So how's it feel? Like you said, you guys parallel careers as far as, what you contributed to the program.
That's something that's super special to me, just because that was the kind of the intro to Homer football that I have a memory of. Will's the reason that I wore 16 my junior year, before switching back to 13, which is something that I had always worn, and it was my dad's number for Homer football. But I just felt like that was a cool way to honor Will for getting me to that stage, really, and building that love of Homer Trojans football. So it's definitely cool to be able to go into the record books there and see our names right next to each other.
Of course, I could always blame you wearing number 13 too on your dad had to be a Dolphins fan, So Dan Marino, number 13. I kind of figured there must have been some correlation in that in his mind for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a Dolphins fan, and he obviously was a big Dan Marino fan as well. So I think that was the number 13 kind of hit from there, and I kind of just took that on as well, which was special to be in a Homer Trojans football jersey with the same number that my dad wore.
So I'm going to have you see if I'm going to get you to weigh in on what'll be the eternal question. I have one guy's answer, and I'm still working on getting the other guy to get on a podcast. I'm still waiting to get a hold of Jaden and get him on here. But who was the faster runner between the two of them? Alex said, I think at times, he got me and I could do things, but I think overall I was faster than Jaden. So what? You're a neutral advisor. But you got to play 2 years with both of them. So who was the faster?
So I think that's an interesting question. I think if you just were to line two of them up, without football being involved, I think Jaden's probably the faster person. I think on the football field, Alec was faster. I think he just had absolutely no fear running through, holes in the line of scrimmage, and just when he was carrying the ball, the speed that he had was just unparalleled. So I think my answer, and maybe this is, kind of taking the easy way out, I'll say with football not involved and just lining them up, Jaden's faster, but on the football field, Alec was faster.
Of course, they both scored a lot of touchdowns back in their Trojan days. So that it does make for a fun conversation with the two of them. Like I said, Alec was a riot talking about that. But like you said, you grew up playing with both of them right from youth football on up their whole career. So again, like we say, possibly this maybe of the sectional championship teams, maybe the best of those sectional teams. It's just the overall talent. I mean, the 2017 team was good. Of course, the 2005 team with Dustin Morris, among others, was a good team as well. But maybe overall talent wise, maybe this 2014 the best of the of at least of the teams in the 2000s. Tough to compare you guys to the 85 and the 86 teams, but obviously you had a very special bunch you played with for these 2 years.
I remember obviously, being in the Dome with the 2005 team and watching them play, and Dustin Morris was obviously such a special runner, similar to Alec. Obviously I wasn't around for the 80s teams to be able to compare that. And I was at school for out in New Jersey at college for the 2017 team, but I was able to kind of watch them on video a little bit. I like to think that we were pretty talented. I don't know that we're better or worse than any of those other teams that accomplished that same goal. But I think top to bottom, as I kind of mentioned, that the depth that we had on that team and talent was special. Alec is a runner unlike any other. The vision he had, the speed, the strength. Every time I handed the ball off to him, I felt like, this one could go the distance. And a lot of times it did. And Jaden is maybe the best athlete that I've encountered. His ability to run, jump, his juking ability always made for punt returns, to be something special. I think there were certain times where he'd catch that punt and he'd probably make, 4 or 5 guys on the other team miss before, he was tackled. And sometimes he was making the same kid on the other team miss twice in that same punt return. So, to have those guys, and then you go down the list with Jake Hayes, that was kind of a do-it-all. He could catch but we could also run the ball with him. Dylan Williams-Bachman was very similar on that team. And the year before, going back, like a Jay Casey, they all kind of were that same kind of player where, when you mix that with a great offensive line that we touched on earlier, again, it was really tough for teams to stop us. So, I'm not sure, maybe someday they'll figure out a way to compare all of our teams, but, I think our team was pretty special.
Well, Drew, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us here, and I'll go back down memory lane with, two outstanding football seasons.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to kind of relive a few of these football memories, and obviously I love Homer Trojans football, so I'm really excited to continue listening to all these podcasts that you're coming out with, and I think it's great for the community to kind of get an inside look at the Trojans football program.
And with that, that'll do it for this edition of Trojan Football Talk. Today's show brought to you by AmeriQ Credit Union, for every day, for everything. Located next to Little Caesars at 3944 Route 281 in Cortland. By the Cortland Voice, the exclusive media partner of Trojan Football Talk. For all your local news and sports in Cortland County at no cost to you, check out CortlandVoice.com. By the Royal Auto Group on Route 281 in Cortland, the home of no hassle, no razzle-dazzle. Check them out at RoyalAutoGroup.com. By Yeaman Real Estate at the entrance to Yeaman Park off I-81 exit 11 in Cortland, and by our newest sponsor joining us today for their debut, DJ Philly C. Make your wedding party or event extra special with the best DJ in the area. Contact DJ Philly C at 607-745-4346. So from my guest Drew Cottrell and yours truly Tom Vartanian, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.